Now he's afraid over there. I got him right. Got him right where I want. Hi there. I'm Gus Hansen, and I'm going to be talking to you about intermediate and advanced poker strategies in No Limit Hold'em. In today's tournaments, you will encounter a lot of different people. You're going to have beginners, novices, intermediate players. You're going to have your seasoned pros. But no matter how good you are, you're always going to make mistakes. No Limit Hold'em is a very difficult game, and you will encounter situations where you just don't know what the right move is. And I'm going to try and teach you how to get rid of some of those mistakes. I'm going to start out with some basic theory, but just because it's basic, don't think it's not important. It might actually be the most important thing you have to think about in poker is the position you have at the table and your starting hands. Let's start out with your position at the table. We have the dealer button. You have two blinds to the left of the dealer button. Then you have early position, middle position, and late position. Depending on where you're sitting at the table, a lot of your decision making is going to be based upon that. If you're in late position, you know what all the other people are doing. You know if they're checking, if they're calling, if they're raising. So you've got a lot of information that you can use to make sound decision making. If you're in middle position, you of course have the knowledge of what the early position people are doing, but you still have people act behind you. So sometimes you're in a good position, sometimes you're in a bad position. In early positions, it's always somewhat bad because you never have the knowledge of what the other people are doing in the hand. So there's a lot of strength in being on the button, having good position, and I probably can't emphasize that enough. I very strongly recommend people to lead out a lot of times. People get, and on top of it, people a lot of times are not used to it. They're used to the check to the raiser, and that's one of the most often used mistakes, I would say. It's generally check to the raiser. I mean, basically, admittedly, I might have a hand, but I might just be raising because I have good position. And, I mean, there's three cards on the flop, cards of both of us hands. They might as well hit you as they might hit me. So it should be clear by now to everybody that position is very important. There is one thing, though. If you have a very aggressive style, tend to lead out a lot, sometimes position seems to be not that important. My aggressive style tends to diminish the value of position, but nevertheless, it is very important. There's, of course, premium hands, and they're the easiest to play. You can have two aces, two kings, and everybody knows that it's pretty much the best starting hands you can have. So your decision making is very easy. But let me tell you one thing. Starting hands is also very much based on your position around the table. Some hands that are played very aggressively on the button should be actually discarded up front just because you have 8, 9 players behind you, and that limits your decision making a lot. So starting hands should be evaluated depending on your position around the table. If you're first to act, you can pretty safely only play premium starting hands, means aces, kings, queens, big to medium pairs, ace-king, ace-queen suited, hands like that. As you go around the table to middle position, you can lower your categories a little bit. You can throw in some hands that plays well. If you have early limpers, might play well in multi-way pots. You can have suited connectors, 7, 8 of diamonds, 9, 10 of clubs. You might have weaker aces in there. You could have ace jack, ace 10, ace 9, suited aces. And as you go around the table, you get to the button and nobody is in. You pretty much, depending on your style again, pretty much play anything. Being on the button give you tremendous leverage. You can raise. You last to act on every betting round, and the blinds are in a tough spot to call any raise from the button. If you play poker, you should be able to always vary your strategy. So sometimes I can sit at the table and I don't play a hand for half an hour because I don't really get anything, any good hands. So I just fold all of them, and then the next half hour, people have noticed, hey, this guy hasn't played for the last 20 hands. He hasn't played a single hand. So if they still have that picture in their mind, now I play a couple of hands in a row. It doesn't necessarily have to have a big hand, and change around all the time. So people don't know exactly what they're getting. And just to make sure you understand, starting hands, big cards is so much better than low cards. You want to flop top pair. It just makes your decisions easier on the flop and later in the hand. So what that means is, if you hand that's up to 21, not to confuse with blackjack, but 21, a 9 being of course a 9, a 10 being a 10, but a jack is 11, a queen is 12, king is 13, ace is 14, being the biggest and the mightiest cards in the game of Hold'em. So what you have is, if you want to add up to 21, jack is and a 10 is 21, a queen and a 9, a king and an 8. Of course, you've got to mix in the value of being connected. 10 and a jack makes more straight. It adds some value to the hand. Being suited adds value to the hand. But again, big card is much more important. So if you add the numbers together, just to get a rule of thumb of how good your hand is, you can kind of say that if you're first to act, early position, you really don't want to play a hand that adds up to 21, being a jack or a 10, queen or a 9. You need a much better starting hand. I would probably go as high as to say 25, maybe even 26 if you're first to act, you're first in, you have the worst position throughout the hand. 26 being an ace or a queen, ace king, maybe king queen suited. Premium starting hands, of course, big pairs. And then as we go around the table, you get to middle position, maybe you can go down to 25, 24, 23. When you get to the button, you don't need to worry about adding up your hands. You can pretty much go ahead and raise with anything. You only have to go through the blind. But let me remind you, it's important that you're the first one in the pot. There's a big difference. If somebody is already raised, your starting requirements go way up. You don't want to play the button with an ace-7 just because you're on the button. If 2, 3, 4 people is already in, it diminishes the value of your ace-7. Somebody is probably already have an ace, and as we said, if you're early in, you probably have a premium hand. You might have ace-queen, maybe ace-jack, so you don't want to play your ace-7 on the button just because you're on the button. You want to play it as the first guy in the pot. The importance of being the first guy in the pot is that when you raise, you can pick up the blind. When you merely call a raise, you have to hit the flop. You have to play the hand later. You don't get the added value of just picking up the blinds, which is a big part of the game. There's